Bernie, this is one thing you don't have to fix. Mike? Hell, okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We will soon be starting. In about 5 minutes. If you want, you can noodle at the back and check out the exhibition that while we are waiting a few more minutes. No need to sit in awkward silence. But we will be starting shortly. So welcome if you're joining us for the Climate and Gender session, which could be many different sessions. I appreciate that as a very generic intro. But we haven't started just yet, but I just wanted to start to call folks in. Full transparency, if you are coming, and I would if I was in your position, aware that we were going to have also a reception. Our caterers are in the wind. Maybe a sandstorm carried them away. I have no idea. So please, let's vibe it together. We have no idea where they are. It is official COP28 catering, and there is no phone number for them. So hopefully they will come, and we will have the full promise of today's event together, which is some discussion. I think we will take questions from the floor because we have so many at this time, and I think it's a waste to not engage with you. And then, inshallah, if they come, we will have catering. So just some snacks to break up your day. So welcome if you're joining us. Please do stay. There's some seats also at the back. And then I'll tell you who I am in a little bit. I haven't quite done that yet. All right. Welcome. Oh, maybe if I sit, will people at the back be able to see? Well, Andrew, you don't count, you're standing up. The people sat at the back, can you see? Well, at least you can hear. Fantastic, thank you. All right, welcome to you all. Hello, my name is Eliza Anyangwe. I am CNN As Equals managing editor. CNN As Equals is CNN's gender inequality reporting team. So essentially, we're the gender desk at CNN. Our work predominantly, who is that? Is it you? Good, you've beat me to it. I was going to mention that, thank you. So the work of As Equals predominantly focuses on reporting on gender inequality from the Global South. The way we do that work is by focusing on structural inequality. So we don't tend to write profiles about exceptional women, even though there are many and they need more visibility. We tend to do 30 to 40 deeply reported investigative pieces a year, mostly in text, some video, and our senior video producer, Ladan Anushvar, is here at the back. And that work is really to try and catalyze more understanding and impact and engagement around gender issues. A year ago, I wanted us, we've been working very efficiently or very effectively. We have a great collaboration with CNN Photos because, you know, as the old adage goes, a picture tells, what is it? Speaks 1,000 words? Something like that. A picture says something, which is the reason we have worked on As Equals since the project was started with the CNN Photos team. And we decided that we wanted to ramp up the ambition of that project working with CNN Photos, which has produced the interactive gallery you can find at that QR code, and some of the pictures you can see at the back of this space. So we're very glad that thanks to Sanitation and Water for All and all the folks who co-hosted or co-hosting the Water Pavilion, we have the pleasure of having this space and we can curate a conversation with you all. You're not only going to hear from me, the opportunity is to hear a little bit about the exhibition itself. So please join me up on stage, Bernie Toison and Brett Roger. Do you say it the French way or have you Americanized it? Rogers, my bad. We have one mic, so we're going to move this between us, but I will tell you a little bit about both Bernie and Brett, whose job titles you can see. If you can, AV, could you go back to the first slide, please? So then people who might want to check out the QR code can do so. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. Bernadette, or Bernie as we call you, is the director of photography for CNN Digital, where she oversees photo coverage of breaking news, features, and long-term projects. She manages a team of editors spread across the globe. If you haven't been there already, across from the entrance into the green zone, so the public space, we have built an 8-chapter installation, and that has really been the work of Bernie and Brett and a few other people who are in the room. Brett, who works closely with Bernie, is the Associate Director of Photography at CNN Digital. So, given that I just said at the start that this has been a year long in the making, how are you feeling right now?
Honestly, I'm going to need a stiff drink after tonight because my night ends tonight. A year ago this month, Eliza approached me about having this ambitious report in partnership with her team that's gender focused. And it's an editor's dream to hear somebody say, I've got the funding, let's make it work. And basically that was like, carte blanche for me to say, okay, what can I do with this funding, with these resources, with the kind of photography we want to push out? And that was December 2022. I did not imagine myself in COP with a photo exhibit, talking in front of you and being able to show you what our collaborations have produced with 7 photographers across different countries, from the Philippines to Bangladesh to Pakistan to Nigeria to Kenya to Brazil and Guatemala. And as you can see from the pictures in the back, they've really given it their all. And my team, Brett here, my partner in crime, we've been together for 10 years now since I've joined CNN. Yes, professionally. We have just really focused on this massive project. And I have to really, this is the strength of CNN, wherein they know what is important. They know the kinds of stories we want to tell and want to show the world. We have the talents for it. We have the resources for us, and I'm very lucky that way. And a year now we have this beautiful exhibit here, and I never would have imagined it, that was going to take place this time a year ago today.
Folks, will you indulge me and give Bernie and Brett a huge round of applause, because if you haven't seen it yet, it really did take a year of wrangling. If anyone has worked, I used to work for nonprofit organizations, for NGOs, and getting any decision made, imagine exactly that at CNN, but much more difficult perhaps. So the fact that we're here is really just an amazing testament to the tenacity of these two people. Brett, I'm gonna ask you about being a male-identifying, a man journalist covering gender, because of course with CNN working on breaking news, it is rare that you have the time to kind of get as deep into a subject as you have on this project that went on for a year. How did you feel? Because the thing that we're always trying to say on As Equals, that there is underreporting of gender stories, but if you report on gender stories, you transform all of society. It's not just about women. But from the perspective of both a photographer and a man, what has it been like working on this project for you?
It's been very rewarding, and I think one thing that was important to both of us was that when we did commission the photographers in these countries, that we worked with women photographers who were from these regions to tell these stories. And a bunch of women from our team as well were involved in the editing and logistics and production of it. So it's been very rewarding to enable that and to be able to lift these voices of the women, both on the production side and the women in these communities whose stories we're trying to tell.
If I may, I have a group of 20 editors, myself included, and we are probably one of the most diverse teams at CNN, and I take huge proud of that, because it is it's, to me, in a newsroom, it's very important to have these diverse voices, because we are representing the world, and it only makes it right for us to be able to have different opinions when we're trying to produce something as big as this. And that comes through with the daily news coverage as well.
I had wanted to make sure that we started this conversation in a space that can get very quickly either technical or social with a conversation with the journalists, because I think it's rare that there is an opportunity like this to hear behind the stories behind the journalism. But what you mentioned, Brett, was the stories of the voices of the photojournalists themselves. We did try to liaise with them to make sure that they could be here with us, but unfortunately, none of the photojournalists who are involved in the project could physically come. So we have created a video that we would like to show you now. Who would like to introduce that video?
Sure. So you'll hear from each of the photographers involved in the project, and they'll just kind of give some highlights, just a quick little reel, a couple minutes long.
I'm gonna tell very bad jokes if this doesn't start in a second. I'm not good with awkward silence. Fantastic. Thank you, AV team.
And a breath of fresh air. Working on this project was fascinating and a breath of fresh air. I was amazed to see the work that these women are doing and everything they have accomplished so far. It was important for me to show their courage, their strength, and their love for their land and this palm tree that they view as their own mother. Our mãe palmeira, as they say in Portuguese.
The relationship between climate change and sex trafficking is complex. There's limited local data on the interplay of these issues, so exploring it was challenging yet important. Climate change is worsening, trafficking remains prevalent, and there's a need not to just have conversations, but actions.
This story is quite important because it needs more awareness so that education will be more accessible to these ladies, and early marriage needs to be looked into in northern Nigeria.
Among these heartbreaking stories, there are girls who are trying to get back to life. I met Marufa, who is now 13. She has a beautiful daughter, Aisha. After giving birth to Aisha, Marufa now going back to school because she wants to be an example in her community. But that is not easy because she and other girls need support from the world so that they can get back their childhood and can have a beautiful life ahead.
It was heartbreaking to see these women struggle through their pregnancies, but also inspiring to see how resilient women are. They never complained even once, and I'm exceptionally grateful for the opportunity to tell these important stories along with other photographers from different countries. This is probably the most important topic of our times.
The story is important to me because I believe that, especially when it comes to climate change, intersectionality without the voices of Indigenous people is erasure, and intersectionality without the voices of women and girls is erasure.
I'd like to add that we used big words earlier today about partnerships and collaboration. And without these 7 women, this project would not be as strong. And we really had worked hard with them from the planning to all the logistics and security. And we wanted to make sure they stay safe because they were there for extended period of time, and wherever they were trying to capture these images, they were just really game from the get-go. They were energized, they were inspired, and they inspired us as well as they energized us. So my deep thanks to these group of 7 women, because it's not often that we get this lucky as picture editors to be able to collaborate with very deep talent such as these you have just heard from.
Thank you again, Bernie and Brett, and to the photographers. We wanted to keep the conversational part of our event today fairly short. We, as I said, wanted to start with the reporters and then bring on representatives from civil society, from different organizations, to try and respond to the photographs. But before that happens, I did want to offer the opportunity, if anyone in the room has any questions for the head and the deputy head of CNN Photos about the project that you see, behind you. It's not up on the screen. Please, no question is too small or too silly from any vantage point on this subject. Yes, I'll pass the mic.
Thank you so much. My name is Regan. In Africa, we have so many young people who are reporting on climate change, and when it comes to issues of gender, and trying out to reach to so many communities. So I've seen this is a good platform. So what way can they be part of this? I just want to find out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned, my team works with a network of photographers around the globe, and we have a database that we have in hand, and we are able to reach out to them at any given time. So if we are working on a deep dive of a project such as this, it is something that if they are photographers, have them reach out to me or Brett, and we'll put them in the database. And then at the right assignment comes through, we'll be able to reach out to them.
Are there any other questions from the floor? Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Dani Gaillard from CIWI. I was interested in hearing what the learnings were about the link between water and climate change from the women's perspective. Thank you.
So let's take the example of the Philippines as a case study. When the Philippines gets hit with typhoon, and the Philippines is one of those countries that is really impoverished, everything else, it's like an earthquake, and everybody gets displaced. And this is what happened with the story, wherein a typhoon hit, and that community gets affected, and therefore when they get affected and lose homes, the families, including women and children, also move away. And therefore, some of them are detached from that family, and some of them land wherever they may be. And there are Good Samaritans as well. And one of the subjects that we have followed was trafficked and the early goings. And when we connected with her, we discovered that an organization in the Philippines was able to take her in and be able to support her. So when there is a global crisis in terms of climate change, such as a big typhoon hitting a country, it does affect these communities, and there's a domino effect.
I think in addition to that chapter, we found that water was an issue, throughout most of the chapters, if not all, from having to go long distances to fetch water, increasing the risk of sexual violence, to the increased risk of child marriage in Bangladesh, where there's flooding and then the families, have financial strain and it increases that risk. So I think water and climate is whether it's water, flooding or drought, like water was kind of a theme throughout each chapter.
Yes.
My name is Henk Holtslag, the Meta Smart Center Group. I was wondering if you make images or movies, do you, and in this case, water-related problems and droughts, etc., do you make also the relation to the causes of the climate change?
Do you want to take that or should I? Yeah, okay. This job is very awkward. So you were talking about the causes, yes. So As Equals, as I was saying at the introduction, doesn't actually do any breaking news. All of our story are what I would call deeply reported, either investigative or revelatory journalism or solutions journalism. While it is difficult with individual issues, because we still need to tell stories, take someone in the audience through an event or through a character's story into the systemic problem, we still do try and do that with all of the work that we put out so that people can understand what is at the root cause of an issue that we cover. Absolutely, yeah. And I think actually that work is very much value add, because we are in a breaking news environment. And so the opportunity to move more slowly and to produce reporting that people have to spend more time with, but that also gives them broader context and a deeper understanding, is the work that we try and do on As Equals. A final question? No? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Christabel. I specialize in water conservation, mostly rainwater. So I have a question. Now, in the instance that I have identified a problem, let me use his example. So the women in Bangladesh are having a hard time traveling the long distance for water, and they may experience sexual harassment. So once the story has been shared and aired, my question is, what's next for them?
So that's a really good question. And I think actually in many ways, the journalists on my team who do this type of work, that is one of our frustrations, because of course, everybody has their own role to play. So we do not, for example, if we report on a woman who has to walk longer to fetch water, we are not the best people to then say, here's where the water should go. Our job is to speak truth to power and hold to account. What we try and do to make sure that we do that job as effectively as we can is we think very deeply about impact and engagement with our journalism. So in one way, that is why we're here, because we know that in a 24-hour news cycle, if you report on and with our work on CNN, because of the size of CNN and our reputation, we try with our journalism to punch up. So we don't, the stories we're doing is not so much about, let's say, as terrible as it is, about the man beating his wife, but about the kind of culture or the system or the lack of regulation of the things that facilitate a man beating his wife, as opposed to the weight of CNN punching down on this man who is beating his wife, if that makes sense. So when we are thinking about reporting on a subject like that, we often think about who are the people who can use our journalism to catalyze change in the world. So when we're starting a series, so Ladan, for example, who I pointed out earlier, as we identified climate as a series, as a subject we wanted to focus our reporting on, we have three major themes of our work, which are body care and climate. And Ladan spent a huge amount of time speaking to people all over the world who worked on these issues to ask, actually, what are the framing, what are the kinds of narrative frames that are not helpful? What are the kinds of subjects that are underreported? How can we be helpful, but in playing our part, right? And in telling the stories that we need to tell. So we bring our journalism as much as we can. Organizing something like this is not easy. You can't expect a newsroom. I'm from Cameroon, a newsroom in Cameroon to report stories and then to think about how people can engage that impact. But with the reputation that we have and the resources by being a grant-funded team, we can say, how are the people who make decisions that affect our lives, can we encourage those people to engage with that journalism? But yeah, that is indeed a question of all journalism, which is what is the real life impact beyond the reporting? But that takes more than just us, I think. Bernie, Brett, I'm just keeping an eye on time. Before we move to the next session, can I ask you both about voice and agency? I think you've talked a bit about this when you talked about selecting the photographers, but when, we know that the situation, particularly when it comes to the impacts of the climate crisis on women and girls, in fact, in most parts of the world, we're not even counting, gender diverse people are not even visible. But let's just say on women and girls, the impact is disproportionately heavy. There is a chance that a lot of the reporting can be very negative and can frame people and portray them as victims, because in some ways, they have been victimized. How did you think about agency and voice through photography? Because the characters in the pictures don't have words that they can use. How did you make sure, because we talked a lot about this, that we didn't just have a narrative that helps us who are in privileged spaces feel, sorry for these women, but to see them slightly differently?
One of the instructions I've had when we were talking with all the photographers is the need to find good news, that not everything we're going to do and capture is doom and gloom. And we found that in Brazil, and we found that in Kenya or Nigeria.
I mean, we tried to find it throughout every chapter, but some, had stronger examples than others.
Right, and we made sure that the photographers were keeping an eye on that. In Brazil, for instance, it was impacted by deforestation, and the photographer found, in fact, a lot of the stories that we have were really in deep research in conjunction with the photographers that we have commissioned. And a lot of them, because they're from those countries or from those regions, they are fully aware of some of these hard stories that we are about to tell. And so it was important for them as well to be instructed that we have to find some moment of goodness in all of these unfortunate circumstances. And we found it in a couple of stories. But going back to your question earlier about what happens now, the one thing about this project is that we did not go the traditional way of publishing this story. The traditional way for us as digital editors is to produce something and put it online. But what we had done is really force ourselves to put this in front of policymakers. And with the help of Eliza, over the summer, we were in front of the UNGA presenting this particular production, and of course now at COP. So in some ways, we're pushing that envelope that it's just not going to have to be a publication that you see online or in newspapers or wherever. It's part of pushing that conversation through so that we will have, or at least be able to mold public opinion and have that affect policymakers.
Folks, please join me in thanking Bernie and Brett. Bernie, Brett, thank you so very much. All right, we're over to the second part, but recognizing it's the end of the day, we thought we'd break it up with some singing. Some people were looking very enthusiastic, actually. They were like, finally singing at COP. No, not singing. We have a video, so we produced an explainer, which we will show now, because of course, for many of you here, the subjects of our journalism will be very familiar. In fact, many of you might even be disappointed that journalists don't go far enough or deep enough. We're not taking it seriously enough. But also for many people in the world, the connection between climate change and gender inequality is not something that they consider at all. So we produced this explainer using stop motion graphics to make it more engaging, that tries to make that connection plain, and we would like to show it to you first before introducing our expert panel. 115 people, $202 million US. That on average is the number of people who have died and the amount of money lost every day due to extreme weather events across the globe in the past 50 years. Human-caused global warming is reshaping our world. Glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising, storms are becoming more ferocious, heat and drought more extreme, and people everywhere are suffering. But who is affected the most? Well, climate experts say your location, wealth, ethnicity, and even the level of your education can affect your experience with climate change. But did you know your gender also plays a huge role? Here are 4 examples of how women and girls are the most impacted. When a family's crop fails or there's no more fish in the catch, tensions increase in the household that can lead to violence. Data from Kenya shows that women living in parts of the country that experienced extreme weather events had a 60% higher chance of reporting intimate partner violence. In another study from India, Pakistan, and Nepal, a 1 degree Celsius rise in temperatures was also connected to an increase in violence against women. women and girls who are forced to leave their homes because of the changing climate are also more at risk of violence.
While they sleep, wash, bath, or dress in emergency shelters, tents, or camps, the risk of sexual violence is a tragic reality of their lives as migrants or refugees.
Women make up almost 40% of agricultural workers worldwide. In sub-Saharan Africa, that number goes up to 50%. Yet, on average, less than 13% of the world's landowners are women. This matters because land ownership is a source of wealth and status, and that can be a cushion against climate impacts. On top of that, women have been described as incredible stewards of the land, whose extensive knowledge can help protect, adapt, and build resilience to climate change, if only they're given the opportunity. Women spend 3 times more hours on unpaid care work than men. That's 4 hours and 25 minutes of every day. And climate change-fueled extreme weather exacerbates this inequality. According to one study, when exposed to extreme heat, women in the US will work an extra day per month, but in India, it will be 90 more minutes every day, and up to 150 extra minutes a day in Nigeria. This has a huge knock-on effect, with women and girls having even less time for their education or careers. Lastly, did you know that extreme heat can affect a pregnant woman's ability to regulate her body temperature? And that severe exposure to high temperatures can increase the risk of stillbirth and early labor? And that's not all. Air pollution, the majority of which comes from burning fossil fuels, has also been linked to stillbirths. A 2022 study estimated that nearly 40% of the world's stillbirths could be connected to exposure to pollution particles.
Climate change is a man-made problem and requires a feminist solution.
Now, women and girls are not just victims of climate change. Indigenous women are at the forefront of environmental conservation. Many women farmers have traditional knowledge of sustainable methods, and women and girls have long been leading climate activism.
Can't we trust those who, for the longest time, have built a sustainable relationship with nature? Women should lead, and we should have them in a decision-making table.
All right, talk amongst yourselves. I need to find my panelists. Oh, laptop, why? I mean, phone. Why do this to me? Here we go. All right. Now I'll call up our experts who, as I introduced at the beginning, we are really grateful to have, because the idea is that they will put our work into context, and maybe, just maybe, we'll ask a few pointed questions about the speed of progress or the lack thereof, not just generally on the climate crisis, but on the role of women. We only have half an hour for this conversation, and what we wanted to do was not to repeat for all of you who already know the context and some of the data, but to just come to that question, which I think is important to have at this kind of stage of urgency in our sort of shared humanity, which is now that we know what we know. So taking, for example, the gender and climate explainer. Now that we know what we know, what are we going to do about it? How do we make more room at the table for women and girls and gender diverse people to make sure that their problems are heard, but also their solutions? And 4 very brave people agreed to try and take these questions on. And so I'll welcome them all up to the stage now. Let me start with, in the order that I have them here, Sareen Malik, please welcome. She leads ANEW, the umbrella organization. Actually, I'll stand, because people, if you sit there, people in that corner won't be able to see you. Sareen Malik leads ANEW, the umbrella organization of water and sanitation NGOs in Africa, which is present in over 50 countries. She has over 15 years of experience in the water and sanitation governance space. Now, panelists, please forgive me. I won't read your entire bios, because I think you each have Wikipedia pages that people can refer to. So, up next, Vanessa Nakate, please welcome up. She's a Ugandan climate justice activist and a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. Matthias Frumeri, welcome. He is the climate ambassador and head of delegation at UNFCCC at the Swedish Ministry of Climate and Enterprise, and the one brave man. Welcome. We've put you in the middle, which is technically a bullseye from the back. And last but not least, Eleonora Morrow, who is an advisor to the Environment Director at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The real effort with this panel was to make sure that we had policy, in some ways the private sector represented, and the kind of interest that the OECD pays attention to, though you work, of course, with governments, civil society, of course, and activists. The first question I wanted to ask you all, it is going to be a work of patience, passing the mic. The podium mic is on if you want to. Oh, grand. Which, this one? Yep, that one. Alhamdulillah. Okay, let's do that. Is it on? Do I need to press anything? Maybe just... Hello, hello, hello? Hello? Oh, now we're working. Okay, grand. Okay, so let's start at the end. Wonderful. Okay, panelists, I wanted to all ask you, thank you so much for doing this so late in the day, already probably, what, day 4 or 5 of COP now, so folks are starting to get a bit frayed and tired. But thank you, and thank you all for also coming. The first question I wanted to ask was for each of you to just take a moment to respond to the exhibition. It went live, I think it was on Sunday night. How did you reflect on it, given what it was and given the work that you do?
Okay, first response. Yeah, so from my perspective, the main thing that really struck me from this exhibition is how much it highlights the fact that climate change has such an intimate impact on so many of our lives. So from the food we eat to the water we drink, to I think there was also an example of the schools that we're educated at. I think that's coming from the policy perspective, working at the OECD, often something that can get quite lost in my daily work. Although, of course, I'm based in Paris. Europe is facing a lot of the impacts of climate change, but not as much as other countries may be, and as much as we will be in the future. So I think it's also really important to have this really kind of personal, intimate view of the impacts that climate change has. I really like the definition of climate change as a threat multiplier that I think was in the exhibition as well. And the fact that it just highlights that it aggravates existing inequalities within our societies. I think there it's also important to note that it is also an opportunity. So mitigating climate change and achieving a net zero world is an opportunity to deconstruct a lot of these socioeconomic structures that are creating the inequalities and marginalized groups that are highlighted in the exhibition. So that was kind of the positive element that I saw in the exhibition as well, that you also talked about in the previous panel.
Thank you. Please do pass the mic along.
Thanks, and I must admit, I haven't seen the exhibition yet, but even though you sent me the pictures, and I was trying desperately to find them in my phone, but I didn't. But if I could still...
Your phone ate the pictures is your answer?
No. It's just my fault that I couldn't find it. But very humbling to be on this panel and sort of in this context. And if I just maybe could add sort of a slightly different perspective, building on conversations that I've had just over the past couple of 2 days, meeting with, say, the children earlier today, and also being part of the Health Day yesterday in the Climate and Health Ministerial, which, together with the presentations and the film you just showed, I think sort of points also to the impacts of climate change from various types of perspectives, and how that, for us as policymakers, of course, drives home the importance of, how do we, and I'm taking a slightly bureaucratic perspective here now, how do we design our policy processes to be able to respond to that in a way which actually meets the kind of needs and priorities which communities, individuals, countries, societies have in trying to design policies which then will respond to that in an adequate way. And it's not easy. Just on a personal note, maybe when I started out in my career, years and years ago. I was working on development finance, and we had sort of in our structures, I counted. When designing a project, we had to have 14 different perspectives taken into account. And in a way, it becomes overwhelming. How do you do that in a way which actually helps deliver the kind of results that you want to achieve? On these various perspectives which I just outlined, from a youth perspective, a gender perspective, a health perspective, indigenous perspective. So my plea would be and this is of course upon ourselves as well as policymakers, and I think the OECD does great work on this in helping us design this as well. What is the checklist for us to be able to design that kind of policy in a way which actually responds to the kind of needs which we need to meet? So, maybe we can dive into that a bit as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And perhaps it's not that fixed as opposed to ask and respond and design policy, but actually a continuous dialogue and an engagement with the kinds of people who are now about to speak also. Serene.
Thank you, Eliza, and thank you to Brett and Bernadette for those excellent pictures. Now, I don't know how many of you have looked at the pictures by a raise of hand. Okay. Did you notice how dignified the women look? Did you notice that?
Bernie's clapping at the back. She's like, mission accomplished.
They actually look dignified. And the reason I ask you this question is because once upon a time we were at a meeting with this popular local leader, and she came in front of us and she told us, do you know how many indignities I had to go through to come and look dignified in front of you? And I think this is where the major issue is. As a water practitioner, I often say, and I will be the first one to admit, that we failed to look behind the veil. Have we asked ourselves the question of how did she get there? What was it between her morning and up to that very point for her to get there? What did she have to go through? When I look at it from a water and sanitation perspective, I can only imagine the nightmare of waking up. I mean, we've said it 100 times, waking up at 4, walking distances, digging pits, looking for water, and hopefully maybe you'll make it over there. And I think Bernadette and Brett actually mentioned that one of them, or somebody who had mentioned there was a 13-year-old that had given birth. But they still managed to come and look dignified in front of us. So it is up to us now to go back and find out what is it that brought you here. And I think we'll get into that when I come to the solution, which is actually access to water and sanitation and the effects of climate change against that. Thank you.
Serene. Vanessa.
Yeah, thank you so much. In addition to what you've said, I think that many times people look at what they call like the final product or the result, but they never pay attention to the process. And I think many times the process that makes women and girls who they turn out to be, either in those pictures or on world stages, that is the process people never get, to look at. I know so many young women here who are, climate activists, but many people may call them inspiring because they have found them at a climate conference, but no one will ask them the experiences they have gone through in their communities to do the work that that they're doing. Some have been called, prostitutes for standing on the streets to raise awareness about climate, but many times people see what looks good, but they don't ask the processes that young women go through. But in regards to the question that was asked, for me, it made me really see how, girls and women, we don't live single issue lives. And it made me realize that the same woman or girl who is already living in a community where she experiences a lot of inequalities will be the same person to experience, the impacts of climate change, will be the same, child to drop out of school if their parents cannot take them to school anymore. It will be the same girl who may be forced into early marriages, or the same woman who experiences, violence in her family. So for me, that's what it really made me understand, that women don't live single issue lives, and the climate crisis is obviously a threat multiplier in these communities. And if we are to talk about climate action, if we are to talk about climate justice, we shouldn't leave, women and girls behind. We need to talk about their experiences, but also not just as the victims that, the climate crisis or the inequalities in societies make them to be, but also as, people who stand up for themselves. I think that is the other thing that I saw through that, the resilience of women amidst these crises. I think growing up, I have seen that women always have solutions, they always have the most immediate solutions, either to family, to community. But what they lack is the resources, the stages to share these solutions. And in the climate space, it's really important that we not only, talk about the experiences of women when it comes to the climate crisis, but also to think about the solutions, that they have to offer. I believe they are the very first responders to the climate crisis. When you talk about adaptation, or addressing loss and damage, I think that women are actually the ones on the ground when those disasters happen, and they are the ones who most likely, react or respond immediately. And usually their response is to save their children, to save their families, to save, their husbands, because that is how women are. They are solution based, and that is why we need to have them in climate spaces, in climate leadership as well, and amplify their voices.
Thank you. Serene, can I ask you to answer, or what would you offer as an answer to the question that Matthias raised about, okay, policymakers are saying there are more and more people we need to consult to make sure that people aren't left behind. How do we do that? What does that consultation start to look like? Particularly not just within diverse groups within a specific country, but actually across the globe. One of the things we try and do in our journalism is follow an issue upstream, as we call it. Something happening at a well in Tanzania might be the result of a policy decision, or something happening at another, and how does that, in a globalized world, how do we start to connect those dots?
All right. Something that I've been repeating for quite a while, and I will be doing so every day here at COP, is...
Spoiler. Spoiler alert.
It's already been mentioned.
Okay.
Climate change is a threat amplifier. Water is a resilience multiplier. Let us accept that and put that at the center of the work that we are doing. In another
tell us
panel,
what you mean about that.
What I mean is that when you look at the case of these women, if their water needs, water and sanitation needs had been adequately met, we would have been able to construct at least ramparts of resilience around them. They would be in a better position from an education point of view, health, agriculture, you name it. Water runs across. And climate change, of course, threatened that. Now, we've heard about the time poverty, whether it's the gender-based violence, the time poverty, the maternal health, and the fourth one, what was it? Education. Yeah.
Do I know my own story?
If the issue of water and sanitation is not sorted out, it affects and undermines each and every one of those various components. Now, climate change has come in, all right. We've heard the stories. I don't have to repeat how, the distances are getting worse. This is also an homage to Ellie Swan, who lives in Timbuktu, somewhere at the back, that once came to one of our conferences, all the way from the Sahel, took an entire 45 minutes of my session to tell the policymakers, we are suffering. We are suffering. It's bad. We have to walk further. Our crops are dying. Our cows are dying. We are dying. And we let her have it. So to answer the question, the first thing is, of course, giving credence and elevating these stories. Someone asked over here, Eliza, Brett, and Bettina, what are you going to do about the gender-based violence? Ask her, what are you doing about it? It is not Eliza CNN's job. And to the youth over here, it is not their job. It is yours to fix these problems. We are doing it. We are doing it. You can look it up in terms of how, with the minimal resources. But to come back to the issue of connecting, of course, we have these big global platforms, Sanitation and Water for All Partnership, that seek to bring various stakeholders, whether the private sector, the youth, civil society, government, to have these discussions. And in fact, through these various platforms, we have about 40 commitments that were taken up that were developed within the water sector and taken into climate action. Again, the water sector has something known as the sector-wide approach. It's been in business much longer than climate action. So there's a certain way that it has in terms of pulling everyone in. There was an earlier panel over here saying it should no longer be called a sector. It's beyond the sector. And I said it as well yesterday. I strongly believe that the champions of climate action and the champions in the water sector, we can fix the world and we can fix this problem. But to come back to the issue of water, you want to lift these women and girls out of poverty, we have to find a way to ensure that they have access to water and sanitation. There is no silver bullet. That is the answer. The northern woman was liberated by energy and water. And what did that look like? A washing machine, if I'm not mistaken, and a dishwasher. Did it not free her? Did it not free her? Let us do the same. Let us think together in terms of doing the same for the women in the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthias, I wanted to ask, please, come in.
Thank you so much. I just really want to kindly come in on the issue of the youth. I think that the youth are already doing their role. And I think from the place that my colleague Christabel asked that question, I think she's already helping her community have access to water. But many times we as the youth, we use our own resources to be able to do the work that we do. So I don't think that the youth are doing nothing. I believe that we've actually been doing a lot. And from the place of asking, what can CNN do about it? I think it's from that place of, CNN is probably in a more privileged place than us, with access to more resources, to more partners that we may never get to, to meet in our lives. So I think that, there's a huge responsibility that everyone is putting on young people, including myself, but then there's limited resources that are coming to these young people. I think that the youth climate movement has done a lot to raise awareness about the impacts of the climate crisis, but we haven't just done this through climate strikes or using social media, but we've also carried out projects in our communities. But these are projects that we are doing on our resources, with very limited resources. So I think for me, the question of my colleague is from a place of how can we access more resources to be able to amplify or to scale up what we are already doing, or what can CNN, which is maybe in a more privileged place, do in order to reach the communities that we are not able to reach? I just really wanted to come in on that.
No, that is helpful. And I think that is a great question for you, Matthias, to come in behind on, because, I think ultimately, given the state that we're all in, there's a question that every person and every organization and every community can be asking about what more can we do? And arguably the people with the least resources, whether it is by having to walk further for water, like the types of things our reporting is showing, they're already doing a lot. It is those of us who have more at our disposal, where it is arguable whether or not we are carrying our weight. And in the video that we watched together, there was the point that was made about the role that women play at the forefront, whether it's of climate activism or environmental protection and conservation. I just wanted to ask you, to respond to the question that Vanessa had. And reading you the words of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres today, or 3 days ago rather, who said, "My message to leaders at COP, protecting our climate is the world's greatest test of leadership. I urge you to lead. Humanity's fate hangs in the balance. Make this climate conference count." And I can't imagine how you do that when I see the pictures of the leaders gathered and I can count on a hand, perhaps, the number of women who are amongst those leaders. So are we putting the responsibility, are all those men putting the responsibility on young women in various communities? What is the perspective on how those with the most can do more?
I think that's a very good question, which I often ask myself as well. And I think increasingly the reflection I'm personally making is coming to that very point in terms of leadership, and not so much sort of what I expect of others in terms of leadership, but more what do I expect of myself. And that is something which I would hope that we should all be asking ourselves in our various types of roles we have, whatever level we are, whatever kind of role we have, what can I do? What is the kind of leadership that I can provide in my role in order to make sure that we are advancing on climate action? And I think that sort of also speaks to the point which Vanessa made, that I at least don't expect young people to come forward with sort of the solutions. I think the key element which young people, not least in the recent years, have provided to climate action is exactly to raise their voices and to elevating climate action into something which I don't seriously think that we would have been today if we would have not had all these very strong voices from youth. Another reflection which we would often do as well is if we would have sort of the space for civil society more generally in all countries globally, we would probably be much further ahead as well when it comes to climate action.
And yet civil society space is closing, and not only in the kinds of countries we imagine to be most repressive. In the UK, for example, there's less space.
I shouldn't go into individual countries maybe,
No,
but more generally, just sort of highlighting the importance of space for civil society, because sort of the other side of the coin of leadership is, of course, accountability. And how can we make sure that whoever has a role where they can in some way influence a direction of a country, a society, a community, how are they held accountable and to what they have committed to? And of course, in a way, that is also a key element of this COP, where we are, the key element for us is the global stocktake. We have committed to a certain number of, in this case, emission reductions and strength and resilience, and making sure that there is finance available. And the global stocktake will be a scoreboard in terms of how we actually, what have we delivered. And of course, from a Swedish and an EU perspective, we want to make sure that we are taking action on that. So in a way, sort of both providing leadership and providing accountability in terms of making sure that we, as a global community, are taking steps to be better next time, and sort of continuously act on that the kind of evidence that we're seeing that we're not doing enough. So just sort of leadership and accountability are really two words for us, I think, as all in our various roles to reflect on how we can be sort of providing that from our own respective roles that we have.
Eleanor, from the perspective of the OECD, how, to that question that I, asked at the start, like now that we know more, how can we do more? What is it that, and particularly around the, the issue of making sure that women and girls are at the table, that their voices are heard, and that they're part of imagining what a more climate just, future looks like. How do you take that into consideration at the OECD?
Again, so at the OECD, that's actually not my realm of expertise. But maybe if I can answer it from a bit more of a personal perspective. Also, as someone that was working in a civil society organization until last year and just joined the OECD actually about a year ago now, so kind of moved into the more kind of institutional policy side of things. I think I've also been asking myself that same question of where is it that you can make most of an impact, right? And I think there are, it's the top-down versus bottom-up kind of approach to addressing climate change. And I think there are, as Matthias was saying, from kind of the youth civil society perspective, lots of pressures that can be put on policymakers. And then from the policymaker perspective, there are, the whole process, including in the OECD, is a lot slower than is needed. We are obviously in a very urgent situation, as the IPCC says. We're walking when we should be sprinting. It's really, policymakers are too slow on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think there are very complex questions that need to be answered to achieving a net zero society. Because it means a complete transformation in the ways that we live, the ways that we move around the world, the food that we eat, as we were saying before. So I think, there's kind of a meeting in the middle that needs to happen there, where the speed that is necessary is met with the time that is required to find solutions that really mean that we achieve net zero in the fastest way possible, and in a way that is as inclusive as possible to also the needs of women and girls, and beyond women and girls, also other marginalized groups, and the whole intersectionality question that I'm definitely not the best person to speak to, but there are, of course, the race, the class, the various social aspects that intersect with the gender issue.
Yeah, I don't really envy any of the people working on this issue because, of course, if you're sitting in the global north and you're hearing part of the solution is to move quicker towards clean energy. We are doing reporting at the moment, looking at what nickel mining is doing in Indonesia, which is providing the minerals that are going to be needed for our green revolution. And just sort of, how do you avoid the tech adage, which hopefully has now been seen to not be helpful to all of society, the kind of idea of moving fast and breaking things, right? And the kind of moving fast towards some kind of climate solution that breaks things in other parts of the world. How do you hold that in the balance if you don't have, as Vanessa has mentioned, the access and the voices and the people in those spaces who are holding your feet, to the fire? But it's very possible. Yes, we have just 5 minutes left, and I had said to the speakers all that, there is always a risk given the state of the world that we're in, that you have a conversation that feels very heavy, necessarily so because I don't think we should shy away from that, but that also we should hold space for some hope, because really that's what powers people on. Because otherwise, if you're anything like me, if you're just feeling depressed, it's harder to get out of bed. Each of you, I would love to know, again, let me bring my question up on my screen. I really need to work on my coordination here. I wanted to know from each and every single one of you, please, and let's start, well, you've got the mic. No, let's start where we are, is on the question of hope. So, how do we, what is the question? How do you make space? So can you each share one anecdote, one example of how space is being made for the voices of women and girls? After all, that is the context of this conversation today. We have tried to identify how climate change is, and inequalities, exacerbates. And we've talked about the need to hold ourselves to account, but also, to inspire by thinking about what is actually changing. So perhaps each of you can conclude on that. What have you seen that is changing that can spur us to keep doing this important and difficult work?
Yeah, to be honest, I kind of struggled with this question for a little bit, which maybe, shows that I don't have much hope, but no, that's... I think the main thing that I think that I've noticed, at least here at COP, is that I personally, at least, I don't know if others have, I haven't seen any manels since getting to COP, so panels with only men, and that hasn't been the case at all conferences I've been to, so that's already, I think, a good first step. So just in terms of very, very practical anecdotes, another very practical anecdote is that at the OECD delegation to COP, we only have 15 people, but we have a token male instead of a token female, which, of course, is a very practical anecdote, but that's the one thing that I could think of. But I think these kinds of exhibitions and the kind of photography that that CNN has been doing is really useful in having a bit of that hope again.
Thank you, Matthias.
Thanks. I was in Kenya a couple of months ago where we were shown a project which the Swedish Development Agency were engaging in, where they were supporting rural women in entrepreneurship. And the kind of results that that project had yielded in terms of, how you saw not only the local communities making money and from their business, but also sort of a more preserving and developing ecosystems in their particular region, to the point that some of these women were saying we don't need the men anymore. Of course, that's sort of maybe a different problem in itself, because of course we all need to be needed. But it was, I think it was such a great example of entrepreneurship and of how women were when presented with that possibility, and grab that possibility and making it into something really successful. But just on another note as well, sort of on the entrepreneurship note, we have a pavilion here with 23 companies who are sharing the kind of solutions that they have available, and that really gives me hope to see the kind of solutions that they can offer in terms of any kind of sector, basically, and saying that they're ready to do this and they're ready to make the transition, and they just want to share these kind of examples with partners globally. And I think that's what's gonna make it happen.
We're gonna go around and count how many of them have women CEOs.
Oh, you should.
Serene.
Okay. We discovered that when you address the issues of disenfranchisement and disempowerment and distress, and support is given towards that, it really built and transformed women into very assertive beings, which then mattered when they had to sit in these various committees, which is part of the citizen participation. Their voices were stronger. It is really important to understand, like I said, what is it that got her there? Important to provide this support. You need to talk about her poverty. You need to talk about the fact that she's getting beaten at home. You need to talk about pretty much everything and provide the solutions, whether livelihood, whether psychosocial support. That, we found, was a very powerful tool in the development of these empowerment programs. There is no point going to a community to start talking about rights and empowerments and God knows what else when you have not understood what it is that is causing the disempowerment. So I think that in itself was one of the most important lessons that we came out with, and I urge you to please, yes, make sure you have counselors going with you everywhere you go. Remember, their resilience is already stretched. It's already stretched. Now you're asking them to be even more resilient without giving much in terms of support. So I think that was the one most important lesson that we learned, and I hope that we're able to replicate it. Thank you.
And Vanessa, let's close with you.
Yes, so one of the things that gives me hope, or that has given me hope, a few months ago, a group of people and I came together and decided that we would try and work and find resources to support activists to be able to come to the climate conference, because we know how hard it is for activists, especially from the African continent. And because of that hard work, we had a number of activists that ended up being supported, and many of them are young women. Maybe they can stand up so that you know how much work it took for all of them to be here. So those are all, some of the young women, some are not here, some are coming in the second week, that we were able to, through work of different young activists, to find resources for. But then we don't want them to just come to the COP. So now that you've seen them, interact with them, support the work that they're doing, give them the opportunities that can take them to another level, because we don't just want them to come to the COP and then go back home without anything that can continue or amplify their work the more. So reach out to them, support the work that they're doing, take them to another level. We may not have the resources to take them to the next level, but you may have the resources to increase on their capacity, to increase on their training, to support their projects. So for me, that is what I would ask for from this place.
Thank you. Thank you again, Serene, Vanessa, Matthias, and Eleonora. I don't know if our catering has turned up. Maybe that's it going past. But thank you all for joining us. Please do share. If any of you can stay, if that is it, please eat and drink. There is enough for 50. So you don't have to rush off if you can stay. Please, we encourage you to share the links to both the exhibition and to the explainer. You can see the work at the back, but also, as I said, the 8 chapters that are in the green zone, so it's also open to the public. Meet each other. I'm really encouraged by what I've heard. As we saw in the video, that word from Mary Robinson, who said, climate change is a man-made problem and requires a feminist solution. That doesn't mean it requires necessarily specifically just women, but that it requires feminist values, collaboration, and lots of things that we have seen demonstrated and called for from this panel, and in the photojournalism as well. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your COP. More power to you all.